Hello and welcome to a discussion on science communication and messaging. I'm Dr. Stephen Fleming, co-founder of Traverse Science, and today I interviewed Kristina Campbell. Kristina completed her bachelor's in linguistics and then continued on to do a master's in communication sciences and disorders. She runs the KC Microbiome Communications Group, where she's worked with organizations globally on medical and scientific initiatives on how to communicate science, and she particularly specializes in how to communicate microbiome science. It's such a hot topic right now, very complex. And we talk about, it is about the microbiome, but just the difficulty of communicating complex science in general. Taking something that's complex from, a PhD or a paper and distilling that down into the concrete steps for the layperson. We talk about how scientists can do a better job, just in general, with communication, how they could leverage their improved communication skills to reach their own goals, and just a bit about her own perspective on communication science. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, Kristina, and I'll give you a chance here to introduce yourself. Who are you?
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to chat with you today. So my name is Kristina Campbell. I'm a science communicator and a science writer, and I specialize in writing about the microbiome and microorganisms. I guess I'm finding, I have a very specialized topic, but I have a very broad range of things that I do with science communication. Anything from articles, the typical freelance articles that you would think a science writer does, all the way to helping organizations create infographics, sometimes advising on their marketing, and how they convey the science on their products. So it's just a really broad range of things I do around the microbiome.
Would you consider yourself like a scientist first and then you got into the communication piece, or you came from the reverse direction, maybe a bit of both?
Yeah, I'm not actually, I don't really consider myself a scientist, certainly not a microbiologist. So actually, my background is in communication sciences. So actually, how we speak in our anatomy and language development, cognition. That was my background before I sort of really got fascinated with this area of microbiology and the microbiome. I took a short journalism course to kind of launch me into science writing, and now this is what I write about full time. So when I write about the microbiome, it's not from the perspective of a scientist who has, worked with, petri dishes and pipettes. It's somebody looking at this field, finding out what the scientists know and trying to translate it for others. And I think sometimes, for certain types of writing, it is helpful to be that scientist who knows the techniques and tools and the science very well. And other times it's useful to be kind of that outsider who's trying to get at this and trying to deeply understand. Because I think sometimes if you know something too much, it's hard for you to take the perspective of somebody who doesn't know as much. And so that's where I try to be, is sort of like always taking the perspective of the person who doesn't know a lot and really wants to understand this area and the take-homes from this body of science.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I consider myself like a scientist first, and there's always that. Well, the science says this, but XYZ, the methods, all these other little caveats. This sounds like a difficult space to enter into if you haven't, done the sequencing techniques or the culture things. How do you know that you know enough about something, or when the right level to stop at or to focus in when communicating, especially about the microbiome?
Right. I mean, it depends on what my task is. Often, I mean, I really rely heavily on the experts, like you, like scientists who do the work. And, if I don't understand it, I get them to rephrase it or tell me in different ways that, to help me understand. And then once I understand at a level that I think my audience needs to understand at, then I can go ahead and write, the piece. But yeah, it is a bit of a tricky thing, right? Like how, and it's a bit, uncertain sometimes. It's like, do I actually understand enough to write this piece? But I really would say that like the experts and making sure I have the right experts to advise me and help me understand the concept is really important.
I think even experts would agree. Do I know enough about this to say what I think I want to say?
Yeah, it's hard, right? And yeah, but I think the key for me as a science communicator is to keep one foot in both worlds. Keep one foot in the world of people who don't know much or anything about this area, and then one foot, asking these experts to describe this very complex thing, stuff they know.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're working with some of these experts, how are you usually working with them? Are you trying to, create some content with them? You're looking for them to maybe vet or verify your message that you want to convey? How do you typically work with them?
So sometimes it's as straightforward as, I'm writing a piece, I need some quotes or someone to explain a concept, so I call them up and do an interview. But other times it's more, extensive engagement. So, and I help plan certain events. And, for example, so I'll work with the scientific committee to make sure they're happy with the program for that event, things like that. So, yeah, it's really about, again, that translator role and making sure the scientists' interests are represented in whatever we're doing, and also making sure that on the other side that someone's needs are being met with what the scientists give me. So really kind of making that connection the best I can.
What is difficult about taking maybe like a scientific paper or a concept and then conveying that to a lay audience? Someone might say like, "Isn't that easy? You just dumb it down. You just be simpler." But wink, it's more complex than that, right?
Totally, yeah. And I think that, yeah, that's just one part of it. Exactly, Stephen. Like, using simpler language or whatever. But what I find challenging is putting it into context. And I think, even in science media, this isn't always done effectively because you have science writers or journalists who aren't experts in that overall field, and they do a lot of general science reporting, and they don't know the overall context. So they just report on a single study. And, for many reasons, that's sort of problematic, and it's talked about in the science writing community. Reporting on single studies, it's exciting. There might be exciting new work, but often it doesn't convey like what this means overall for the the field or whatnot. So I think that's the hard part is adequately putting it into context. And again, that's where I rely on my sources, my scientific experts to help me understand that, because to me that's the number one thing whenever I'm writing about this field, is not to just show how a new study is really flashy and exciting. It's to put it into context and say, okay, well, here's why this is a step forward. And it always is just an incremental step forward, ultimately, in science. I think that's, and again, this is a lifelong career thing for me, is like better ways to learn the context and then convey that to the audience.
Yeah, I think a lot of scientists have had a little bit of fatigue around pop science articles. I mean, just the word like pop science just gets a really bad rep in such a way that maybe it's contrarian, but it feels like in such a way that like pop other things don't get quite as much backlash. It does seem to me straightforward to say, let's just talk about this individual study and what we can learn from it. But I know from trying to do some of these things too, it's just so difficult. And when you think you know something, but then when you start talking about it on a simple level, like my wife will ask me questions and it's like, oh, I don't know that. And I don't know that either. I'm just left like, I don't know anything about this anymore. So to try to navigate and find the right story to tell, while still being interesting and engaging and entertaining, I think can be really difficult to do.
Yeah, and those conversations, you have at home with family members, like you're saying with your wife, like I think those are so important for, scientists and science communicators to like really ground you and be like, what it helps you understand what their baseline knowledge is about this field, and then how to, kind of jump off from that point to be an effective communicator. I think that's, yeah, super important.
Yeah. Is there a age of an audience or maybe an expertise level that you most spend time trying to communicate to? Like college educated, high school educated? Can you even talk about these things with children?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, I think, yeah, science communication does span all of that. And I have given talks, at my kids' school on microbes and read one of the many amazing books there are on microbes to the class. But yeah, I guess most of my time I spend communicating with a more kind of savvy audience, and even people in the field, learning about other people's work in the field, or let's say clinicians learning about some of the latest science and how it might apply to their practice. I think that is really where I find myself doing a lot of the communicating, but I still definitely have a passion for communicating with, yeah, all kinds of people, maybe who don't even have high school science, and just really trying to find hooks, and help them just get to, maybe just a slightly higher level of understanding about microbes. Because I think, there's, yeah, I mean, even kids can understand some of these basic concepts, and then the understanding just becomes more nuanced as you have more knowledge.
Yeah. How do you find that hook in some of these studies? Or maybe what you're doing isn't about individual studies, it's about, a concept or a broader field. And I'm coming from the perspective of a lot of papers end up with, we gave one group a treatment, another group was control, and these things went up and these things went down. And even as scientists, it's like, I actually don't really know what it means that some of these increased and went down. We might have ideas of things we want to say about them. Broadly, they were good or bad, dysbiosis or not. So what is how are you finding those hooks to just grab someone?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's about really finding out more about the audience and listening to them. Sometimes it's hard to do, if you're just giving a talk, from very little information, you don't really know. But the more you can get to know the audience, the more I find I can connect. And sometimes, yeah, what I assume about them is not the reality of what they know. So there's, I don't know if you know Alan Alda, who acted in the show MASH.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Watched a lot of MASH with my mom.
Oh, excellent.
Growing
Yes.
up.
So after most of his acting career was behind him, he really got interested in the concept of science communication. And he wrote a book just a few years back called If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? I think that's the title. And the whole book is about, to communicate, you have to listen. You have to get feedback from your audience. And so he actually has, I don't know if you've heard, a science communications center in Stony Brook, where he trains scientists to be better communicators. And he brings in his acting career by using improv exercises to help people be better communicators. And at first glance, it's like, what does acting improv have to do with communicating science? But it's he does these exercises where you're like looking at your communication partner, reading them, anticipating what they're going to do or say, and it just helps you really tune in a way that makes you be a better communicator. So I think it's really great.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I shamelessly here was, in like choir and drama growing up in high school. I did this thing called show choir where we're singing and dancing. It's totally embarrassing, but also cool at the same time. And then in college, one of our roommates, she was in theater and English, and she was just beside herself with how horrible all of the like engineering students and science students were at it, just talking about simple things and being engaging. And in science, you sort of get like showmanship beaten out of you with all these poster presentations and abstracts and how dry it is. Even the simplest of things, like if someone's giving a talk, like just look at your audience, speak clearly. Um, don't put like so many graphs on a page that it might look impressive at first, but there's nothing tying these things together. So
Yeah.
that makes complete sense. The idea of improv, science improv, that sounds kind of fun, actually.
Yeah. And all of that, I think that you're talking about, like, reading out your research and, putting a lot of graphs. I think that comes from, like wanting to convey something to the world, wanting to like tell them and educate them. But to me, science communication is more two-way than that. It's reading and then coming back with something that meets that need.
So listening in this context to me sounds difficult, right? So you can publish a paper and you can look at, am I being cited? Or how many views do I have? You could do the same thing with LinkedIn or Twitter. Like, are people sharing my stuff? How do you listen in scenarios where you don't have like a two-way street, or you're publishing something somewhere on a website, but you don't really get direct feedback that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are various ways to listen. Reviewer feedback is probably one of the ways that scientists can listen to the, where people are, what
As
people
much as we might
understand.
hate that.
Yeah. But I mean, like, yeah, obviously it's like, okay, answering this specific reviewer comment, but then also in the big picture, like, why did they make that comment? What does that show about what they think or what they know in this field? And often, of course, the authors of the paper will be like, well, the reviewer doesn't know anything. Whatever, they're misled or something. So, but taking that as a lesson and saying, okay, well, that's interesting that reviewer said that, because it teaches me that this subject is thought of in this way, and so I have to work to change that, and maybe doing multiple efforts then to change that view, whatever it is.
Yeah, I find that frustrating too, because I guess for publications, for example, um, I worked with pigs, and that's a really unconventional animal model to work with. Most people are more comfortable with mice or with humans, and they sort of know the caveats that come with those. And I would get so frustrated and tired of having to explain the same really simple things. Like, why did you do it this way? It's like, because everyone who works with pigs does this. This is just the way it is. And it was so distracting to the points I was trying to make. But even aside from that, especially with something complex like the microbiome and milk too. Like I had my even really simple things, like scientists call it human milk. They don't call it milk, or they don't call it breast milk, because many animals have breasts. You have to be specific about the species. I just felt like there's a laundry list of caveats you have to go through to get people just to be on the same playing field as you are, to then talk to them. And you don't have any of that to build on if you're trying to take a paper or a concept and break it down for a lay audience. What's the strategy there? Did you just skip it entirely? Just forget about it. Let's assume we're on the same page, even if we're not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess again, it depends what you're trying to do, but it may be that the audience just isn't ready to hear about the findings of the study on the pig model. It's like, you really do have to make the piece about why use a pig model, what are the different animal models, and it's sometimes surprising. And even I write sometimes for dietitians, and some dietitians are not convinced that animal models should have any value or do have any value in dietetics research. But there's this whole piece about mechanisms, right? So So I guess it's figuring out, like, yeah, because as you say, Stephen, like, they might not grasp anything about what you're saying if you start at a too high level and just say, well, here was the pig study. They might kind of write it off altogether if they don't believe that pig studies are worthwhile. So
Been there.
yeah. So it might be going back and just, And I mean, I guess there's a difference between the scientific paper and the communication outside of that to broader audiences. That sometimes, you have to take two different strategies for each one.
Yeah. Okay, and so you've touched on something there too, especially with animal models. I did my work in animals, but I think I'm consistently frustrated or annoyed with the overinterpretation of that type of work, which maybe it is partially because we're not putting our own work in the right context with the right limitations. A lot of things just go unsaid. They're like, yeah, duh, we know it's animals. We know it's going to be different in people. But I think that's where, like, a lot of the annoyance with pop science comes into play, because, you just see these headlines. They're just so blatantly aggrandized and couldn't possibly be right or true, but that's what kind of grabs people. So how do you stay grounded in what the science actually says, without overinterpreting the science while still delivering the right message?
Yeah. And that's the challenge of my life, But I think,
That is the challenge, yeah.
no. And I
That's the
think
whole thing.
the media really does sometimes make this difficult, just the way media is set up, and you have to have something punchy and you're expected to wow people and have a clickbait headline. There are incentives to, aggrandize things and have hype. And I think that's partly why the microbiome field in general is accused of, having a lot of hype, is these sort of incentives to, take something new and really just, supercharge it and make it seem like it's going to solve everyone's problems.
Right.
So I guess, it's an ongoing challenge and lots of tweaks. I think it's good to have lots of diversity, lots of different types of people writing about it and communicating about it in different ways. That's why I think every scientist can have, like, a small role in helping with this endeavor, in their own little way, and sort of like thinking about it less as having someone come out and lead the charge and just be the champion communicator. Like, I think several fields kind of have that in, astrophysics. There are a few really well-known communicators, Neil deGrasse Tyson and others, that kind of, they're the go-to people. But I think maybe for the microbiome, it's more about having lots of scientifically minded people communicating in lots of different ways, and then the public kind of gets this overall sense and gradually builds their understanding. I guess that's how I envision kind of overcoming this hype.
Scientists are notoriously bad at communicating. I fall into this too. It's like, well, I just put all this work into writing this paper. Why do I have to, like, spend the extra work to disseminate it? If it's good, shouldn't people just find it on their own? And but okay, so you touched on something there too. All right, so in some areas we have, I think someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson would go beyond influencer. Really like a celebrity in his own right. Should scientists be striving to be something like an influencer? I guess this depends on their goals. How much more work should just the everyday scientists be putting into communicating their work?
Yeah, I think, and you make a good point. Like, scientists already do a lot, and they have to be real experts in this very specific field, and producing the data and writing the papers, and that is the core skill set that a scientist has. It has to be. And so, I guess the way I see science communication, it is a separate set of skills, and it is a set of skills that has to be developed. It's not, it may come more naturally to some than others, but it really is something you have to spend time on and get better at and trial and error at. So, I don't think that every scientist has to add the pressure on themselves to be like a great science communicator and an influencer. But I think there are little ways that everyone can contribute. So, for example, like, some scientists might just say, well, I'm going to find this bifidobacteria microbe stuffy, and I'm going to give it to a friend of mine who's a new mom and breastfeeding, and just kind of like open up the conversation that this is one of the good bacteria in the breast milk or whatnot. So yeah, there's little ways, that I think every scientist can contribute. Some like the dialogue on social media and get really good at it. Others, that might not be their thing. So I would say, like, yeah, scientists don't have to pressure themselves to do things they don't want to do. And it's hard because you mentioned, like, this impact thing, and it's talked about a lot more now. You have to have impact and influence, but I think finding your niche is, it doesn't have to be in social media and all those other ways. It can be something just that feels authentic to you.
Yeah. I have a hard time not being the, like, quintessential pushes glasses up, well, actually, which is just insufferable and annoying. But, my family asks me questions about things a lot. I just cannot keep up with the amount of weird things they run into and hear. And, I can say that just doesn't sound right to me. And like, why doesn't it sound right? And it's like, you don't have the bandwidth to listen to me talk about why I don't think it's right. Or, just keeping up with the misinformation is so overwhelming. Not even on social media, just with family. And I'm sorry, family, if you ever listen to this. Yeah. But they mean well. It's like, I heard about this new diet. Like, is this the answer? Or they hear about XYZ things, and I don't know. Maybe is it too much to put on someone that, like, they should be correcting all of these things or stewards for them?
I mean, I think,
do we pick a different audience entirely?
Yeah.
Maybe family's the wrong people to convince.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think particularly in this field, there is a lot of excitement and hype and pseudoscience out there. And so it can be, overwhelming to try and keep up with, debunking all those things. But I guess my comment would be that in the first place, I think it's great that they're coming to you, because that means on some level they realize that a scientific perspective is really desirable, and they know you're a scientist and that you might have, better answers than the average diet book, bestseller. And so I think that's good that they're coming to you. And I guess maybe one thing scientists could do over time is sort of build up their list of trusted resources and kind of send them over to those resources to, answer their questions.
Okay, so I tried doing that, and this is where I think this is your point earlier with Alan Alda and what he's trying to do. Is my mom said, okay, like, I hear what you're saying, but where am I supposed to go to learn this stuff? And, lay people are sometimes, what website should you trust? Okay, does it have like .edu at the end, .org? That's kind of like an older way to vet a website. But, I looked through a lot of things. There's American Society for Nutrition, there is the USDA, there's a lot of these websites. Honestly, they're boring and they're difficult to read and navigate, and you get landed in these menus that you have to click 50 times to get to what you need. Whereas the information some people are getting is just so much more interesting, even if as a scientist you look at it and you want to puke because it's about, like, holistic medicine and, like, crystals and just weird things that can't possibly be right. But they're entertaining and they grab you and they're interesting. And I guess what I'm saying is I'd like to see scientific content that is more engaging and I guess there's a couple aspects. One is they have to get in front of someone in the first place to even be clicked on. But two, once you get there, there has to be something to get you to stay there. And so I made that list for my mom. But even I was like, I don't want to read this stuff, and I'm in this field. So ultimately, I was like, this isn't going to help.
I think exactly what you say. It points to the need for more engaging content and things that, me as a science writer, that I can do better, and that scientists, when they have their science communication hat on, things that they can do better. And there are a few initiatives I think that are really good. Like one is the conversation. I don't know if you've heard of this. The conversation.
No, what is that?
Sorry. The Conversation is a media organization that helps scientists. They work with scientists. They have editors that they assign to kind of translate a paper into a really interesting piece for the general public. And so there are ones in several countries, I think Canada, Australia, and they put out really good content that's, again, like really interesting to people. And so, just more initiatives like that help translate it, not to clickbait, but to something that just has more interest and again, has that hook that can think through, like, what are the ultimate implications of this for people's lives, even down the road, and so that they can start to build fill up their barrel of knowledge on that with really interesting content.
Yeah. A follow-up question to what you were just saying. Right. Okay. So we want to avoid being clickbaity, or I imagine most of us, we want to have some small amount of clickbait, but not so over the top. We want people to read our stuff, but to get to the point, is it about being educational or entertaining? Is it pick one? Is there?
I don't think it has to be.
Sacrifice one for the other?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be necessarily. But I think, I think scientists and science communicators have to figure out their boundaries of what, what they won't do in terms of kind of dumbing down or sacrificing the science. And, I think probably those differ a little bit between people. Like, I know one of my boundaries that I have in my writing is I won't use the word healthy microbiome if it's something if someone's talking about, like, you can achieve a healthy microbiome. I just don't like using that because I don't think scientists have defined what a healthy microbiome is. You can say the microbiome of a healthy person, but it's too hard to say what exactly, there's no composition or functional profile of a healthy microbiome. So I think there's certain details you kind of have to work out for yourself. Other writers might use that and might that might be okay with them. And I know some scientists do use that because they have a concept in their own minds of what they mean by that. So I guess I think it depends, for yourself, what you're willing to say. And, and some of it is just, rephrasing in a way that is not using jargon. And I think that, that can be effective too.
Okay, so this is a good piece to sit on for a second. Okay, what should we say instead of healthy? And I work a lot with companies like consumer packaged goods companies or ingredient suppliers, and they are actually trying to be very conservative. They know if they make a wild claim that they could get in trouble from the FDA or the FTC, they could be sued. They're actually very risk averse in the sense of what they want to say. And, we have things like, well, we can't say, it increases this bacteria and that's healthy. So sometimes they want to pull back and use words like supports a healthy microbiome, promotes a healthy microbiome. It actually almost becomes very, not very creative in terms of what can be said. And in one sense, I actually think that's a great thing that, maybe because their hand is being forced to not make such wild claims. And on the reverse, just like you said, like I read a lot of academic papers where there is no company involved, no bias from there, but they're using words like healthy microbiome and dysbiotic, which is leading others to think that they should use those words. And like you, I really disagree with both of those in most contexts, because if someone were to ask you, like, why is it that way, it's really hard to define. What is your approach to solving this problem?
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, you're getting more as well into the interface between science and marketing. And I think that's a really interesting interface. And with marketing, let's say you've done a microbiome study on your product and you want to tell about it. I think, I sort of advocate that, think twice about whether you even want to invoke the microbiome. Is it central to the need you're meeting with your marketing? So
all the biotic companies just kind of scream internally.
Yeah.
Say that.
Yeah, but I mean, and I think maybe it's just a slower process to incorporating like really robust messaging about the microbiome in marketing messages. So yeah, I guess at this stage, I feel like not a lot, there are few companies that really need to invoke the microbiome to talk about exactly why their product is good. Because often, even with probiotics, there's often a health endpoint that is the ultimate benefit of the product. And the microbiome might have changed in a certain way that they think is good, but it's ultimately the health benefit that matters. So, and I mean, it's cool to talk about the microbiome and tell people that this could possibly benefit them through their microbiome. And so in some cases, yeah, it's great to talk about, but I would say, yeah, more companies talk about it in their marketing than need to at this point.
Just kind of jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah, possibly.
Microbiome everything. I was taught to ask why, like a minimum of 3 times. Why do we care about this product? Well, if you eat it, you'll get this benefit. Why do you want that benefit? Because I want to feel better. Why do you want to feel better? What does doing these things allow you to do that you couldn't do before? Or what are you achieving? And in that sense, I think I actually met you at this conference. They were talking, 3 successive speakers came up, and one said, here's how you could talk about your product. And the next one said, I don't think you should talk about your product at all. I think you should talk about the benefits. And then the third person said, who cares about the product or the benefit? You should build a brand that people identify with, and they'll flock to that. And that was just this hilarious. I don't think it was planned, but they each came on and they're like, no, the last person is wrong. This is what you should do. And luckily for the third person, they just happened to be the last one, so no one could have a rebuttal to that. Yeah, so should we be doing that instead? Just not even talking about or maybe not avoiding it entirely, but minimizing the what and focusing more on the why?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very wise to focus on the why. Yeah, that is really important. And I think all those ways you describe are just different ways of meeting needs. And so with building a brand, I presume the idea is to build up a lot of trust and desirability so that when you have messages about the microbiome, then you can, convey them and people will listen to you and you'll have a big audience for that. Versus if you have a specific product that, people, it'll be the top of mind maybe when people have a certain need with their health. So yeah, I guess it's to me, and it really does mean that that's what marketing has in common with science communication. Good science communication is it's all just meeting needs that the people have. And in fact, one definition of marketing that I saw in a recent textbook, which I thought was awesome, was it was 3 words: meeting needs profitably. And so, if you just take away the profitably part, a lot of science communication is just that, meeting needs, whether that need is, some knowledge or, advice on how to live your life. I think it's all related.
I think you could even just keep profitably in there, which of course in context of like a private company means money, but just in maybe in an interaction between two people, you're meeting the need, but there's just a net gain. Maybe it's a net gain in trust, in awareness. If you're an academic lab, right, most labs have to run on like according to the budget spreadsheet net zero, but still they want to invest in better equipment, more students, better talent, training, all of those things. And so I think everyone it wants to grow in some way, maybe not always in like size or in money, but they want to get better at what they're doing or some aspect of that. And I like that definition. And I think marketing, maybe I've drunk the Kool-Aid, I guess. I don't think it is that different from science communication. I mean, I honestly think they're like nearly the same thing. I think marketing might be an umbrella, and science communication is a piece of that. Do you think, and I could be totally wrong about that, do you think it makes sense to position something as science communication versus marketing?
Well, I agree with you. Yeah, I think they have more in common than a lot of people will admit. And I think, that dichotomy is really breaking down between like pure science communication and pure marketing. With all these things like content marketing, where it really is about the long-term goal of helping you understand this topic area, giving you something immediately, giving you some knowledge, and not expecting a purchase in return, but taking that long view that like, well, maybe this, 5 steps later might lead you to want this product, but right now it's just about giving you something you can use. And so, yeah, I agree. Like it's, and many of the things that I do, they're again in that continuum somewhere. It's like, it is really about honoring the science, but ultimately down the line, someone has a goal to profit from this, whether it is, as you say, either through money or through trust or any number of things that people might want. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe profit actually. I'll walk that back a little bit because maybe it's not the best word to use because it just inherently brings money to mind. Maybe like a return. That also brings money to mind. Return on investment. I'm thinking if you're creating a website or content because you're just really passionate about your field and you want more people to come to it, you want to try to get a good understanding of for every blog you write, for every social media post you make, how is that leading to more eyeballs getting on your content or more people understanding it or kind of joining you with whatever your call to action is, because we don't want to just sort of like scream into the void of social media algorithms and just hope someone hears us and hangs out for a while, right? You want to make sure that it is sustainable, not sustainable in the green environmental sense, but sustainable in that you can continue to keep doing that sort of work while having something to show for it. You're able to just keep doing it each day. You're growing in attention or in quality, or whatever the metric is that you personally define success.
For sure. Like I think, and you made me think that often the metric for these things for success is quantity, like number of people and sign-ups to your newsletter.
Gotta
and
get
stuff.
those likes.
But I think, and probably Sarah will talk to this more, but it is, that metric of quality and what's the quality of your subscribers or followers. So it might be a smaller number, but they might be people that are way more invested in this area or way more interested or passionate. So trying to balance that, like giving high quality content that's specific to a certain group and getting, influential in that group is different from just getting more and more and more, numbers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think we've gone this long without even touching on the topic of your talk, which is finding your niche in science communication about microbes and microbiome. But I think the first part of that is important, which is finding your niche. And what you just said is not necessarily about quantity. So what does it mean to find your niche?
Yeah, I think it's probably a process for a lot of scientists. But yeah, it's, and definitely was a process for me too, to find my niche, even as a full-time science communicator. What do I love to do? What's the best balance of trying to reach different audiences for me? And I think, yeah, probably only this year I've kind of reached the point where I feel that I have the balance that I want between, kind of the type of work and the audiences and that sort of thing. And so I think for every scientist, it's a little bit different. I think, again, for younger scientists, they live in a different world, different digital world probably than some of the more senior scientists who, some of them literally started their careers. There was no email, and they've adapted so much to this digital world. And, versus the scientists who, the digital natives who had internet from day one and, had social media, as they were coming of age. And so it's a very different view, I think, and probably finding your niche depends on, which platforms and which media you find easy to use. I'm not saying every early career scientist will want to use social media, but it's probably more suited to early career. And then, again, just thinking broadly, like maybe it's some props or going into an elementary school classroom that you're really passionate about. Maybe it's just sitting down with a friend who's a new mother or father, chatting about all this stuff. So I think, and to me, it's a lot of kind of trial and error and seeing what makes you feel happy.
Mm-hmm. Both. I know this isn't it's not the best distinction to make, like established versus young versus old, but I think at least, an established research professor, they theoretically at that point have found their niche in terms of the content or the type of science they've done, which is great. And that might make it easier then to figure out on the communication side what their niche is, whether it's a method of delivering content, like through email, social media, in person, or the type of audience they want to target for that. Whereas, the younger researcher might be more adept at navigating some of those things, but I think they have a doubly difficult thing to do, which is have they established what they want to be known for, or what they want to be, the reputation they want to build. And I remember starting my company, they're like, you're not really going to know what it does for the first few years. And I was like, that's insulting. I feel like I know what it does now. Like I started it for a reason. But they were right, like it grew and it changed in different ways. And like you, I'm now having a better understanding of like, what are the things I want to spend my time doing, and what do I want to be known for doing. And with that in mind, so you said this year you've really solidified more what your own niche is. Can we hear a little bit more about that? Is it the type of people you want to work with, the activities, or the amount of work you like doing? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's really the balance between working with teams that I work with again and again, and one-off, freelance assignments. And I think I discovered I need some of both, and to really feel fulfilled. So, I do pitch pieces now and again, or editors come to me with ideas, and those pieces they take a lot of my mental energy, and I love the challenge of answering a question and thinking, who in the world will help me answer this question? And so it's very broad. And so, taking on, a few of those, but also having a few groups that I work with that, I really, develop relationships with and can build something with. I also really love that. So whether it's a collection of infographics or a course on probiotics that'll be released as one of those MOOCs, massive online open courses. I really like some of those long-term projects that afterward you just feel such a sense of accomplishment and really that you've worked together with a great group of people.
I can resonate with that. And yeah, there's the multiple ways where sometimes if you're on a single project for too long, you just get so tired of it and you're ready to move on, and you no longer think in terms of how can I add value, but in terms of how can I get this to the finish line as quick as possible, while still having a good level of quality and value, versus it's really it's the switching cost, which is so exhausting to go from smaller project to smaller project. And for me, I've definitely learned I can take it or leave it in the content if the team is right. I would much prefer working with the right people. We've all had those experiences where you're like, I thought I was passionate about this, but this group is just killing the passion.
Yeah, absolutely. And really finding out if they value the same things as you do, because I've had that before, exactly like you say, like you think it should be a great project, but then along the way you sort of realize, well, we're valuing totally different things. So when I present what I think is my best work, you're looking for something else, or you're thinking of it differently, you want to tweak it in certain ways. So I think, it's finding those people that really do have the same values as yourself, and they are out there. It's just sometimes a project is not always a good fit.
Yeah, agree 100%. We've had one of those very recently, and here's our deliverable. We love it. We put this is our stamp of approval, some of our best work, and they're like, "What did you do?" And we're just like, we all thought we were on the right page. Like the Zoom calls, we leave it like, we both feel good. We think we're in line, and you weren't in the end. And then nobody's happy after that. So finding that right fit is really important. And I know you and I are talking right now kind of in the sense of what we do for our companies too. But when I was in grad school, there was just there still is, all this talk about being interdisciplinary, bringing in multiple people from different groups. And there's this and on the communication side, right, too, people might be reaching out like, oh, let's write a post together. Let's, at each other in XYZ things. And it's like, you don't want to just run into those because you think, I don't know, finding someone who's just at least in the same field as you, it's going to work out. Sometimes that's actually the worst thing to do. You want to find someone complementary who's not in your field, who brings something entirely different, because then you can rely on each other to try to achieve your goal rather than sort of competing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think it's worth considering. Yeah, even if you're from different fields, like, are you aligned on what makes a good piece, or what you're trying to get out of it? And I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen, because that's like that interdisciplinary collaboration idea. I think what people sometimes don't acknowledge is that it's really hard. And I've been on some projects as the writer where they are trying to bring together a lot of disparate fields, and it's hard work, and there can be disagreements and conflicts and communication issues to sort through. But I guess talking about my own balance, I like to have one of those projects at least, on the go, because I think, some awkwardness is worthwhile, because it does, it does actually help move forward. Like, I think, as long as the conversations can be respectful and, everything like that, I think it actually is what drives forward knowledge and the field. Like, one example is I'm involved in a project on fermented meats of the north in Canada. And there are just so many different perspectives, and Inuit people, sorry, because Inuit means people, so I should just say Inuit.
Good to know.
They don't always like researchers from the South coming up and studying, their foods, and for good reason. There's this history of things not benefiting them, people studying them and them receiving no benefits. So just navigating through all that, and the local people, or the consultants, the local people, the scientists, all coming to an agreement on what to say and how to communicate some of this data. It's a real challenge, but I think some of that type of work is really important. And even sort of like, it gets uncomfortable for the scientists too, to bring in these perspectives that are more about like culture and how information was passed down from generation to generation. It's not all about data. It's not like data first. So how to reconcile all of that to say something. It's hard, but I kind of like having that challenge once in a while.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. And it's like, well, I'm going to butcher the quotes. I'm not even going to say it, but we're so preoccupied with what we can do that we don't think about what we should do. And I get this is a double-edged sword, because I don't want to sound like I am bashing basic research at all, because it's so fundamental, and everything I did is totally basic research. It had an applied spin to it, but thinking more in terms of the broader context of what are you researching, what does it mean? Are you just like, I think it is great to be data driven, but thinking about what does that data tell you, and putting it in context of the broader world and what you're doing. But just a side note on what you're talking about is, we were working with a project and a client, and there's examples of this all over the world, of saying like, of finding a non-Western culture, I guess you could say, and then ascribing all the benefits to what they eat. They're like, look at the Maasai tribe, they eat goat's blood and all these animal products, and they're super healthy. Look at what the Inuit eat. Look at the Mediterranean diet, all these things. But I found this one paper, and I was like, is this where a lot of this is coming from? It was stating how the younger generation of Inuit didn't look as good, essentially, as the older generation, and that was evidence that the younger generation's diet is poor in a way that's specific to that one project. But as I kept reading, I was like, how did they know that? Like, are they just like got binoculars, like looking at people, and it was like, oh, these are reports from like traders and missionaries and scientists and reporters. It was just this like weird, like, okay, so you got all these random people going into this area making observations, which there's something to be said for non-biased information. But yeah, they had at least the way this was written, no appreciation for culture or anything. They're just making these really weird one-off observations. And then I'm like, is this science at this point, or is this like anecdote? There's no data, it's just like a paragraph thrown in there.
Yeah, and I think there is a real movement now to, I know particularly in Canada, to really strip away some of those assumptions and, take those, as you say, that kind of paper, and really, add perspectives and say, well, put it into context. Like, this was a few people with a few narrow perspectives coming from this sort of place, and nowadays here's how we would approach this differently. And I mean, it's a real challenge, and I think even talking within fields of science, some of that goes on too, because you have your basic assumptions in a field, and someone from a different field that you want to work with might challenge some of those. So how is it that you integrate all this? And I mean, it's not easy. So I commend the scientists who are trying to do this, and even work with some, there are these cross-disciplinary projects at some universities where they will have projects done with like a dance theorist and all kinds of very different fields than science, and trying to integrate this for messages to the public. Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
No, there's definitely, I mean, we started this with me bashing interdisciplinary research. Just because, I mean, the practicality of it, actually, I think for a lot of academics is like, I'm being forced to be interdisciplinary without the funds to be able to do it. Like, you just took your $1 million grant, but you split it between like 3 or 4 groups, and that's like, that's crumbs for what we need to do and all the graduate students.
Yeah, good point. Mm-hmm.
But we are all very siloed, and I remember being so frustrated because we were working in pigs, and I felt really disheartened because of reviews I would get, and then I was like, I feel like I'm expected to know the rodent literature, the pig literature, and the human literature. And not only that, because I'm doing it in this pediatric context, I have to know the difference between adult and infants, and it felt like way too much. Whereas, like, everyone has their own problems, grass is green on the other side. I'm like, oh, those human researchers, they don't even have to look at animal stuff. They're so lucky. But being able to have all those perspectives is very helpful. And me and our statistician were talking with another statistician, and he was saying, yeah, we use this one method all the time, but I was reading this physics journal, and they presented this weird equation, but once I broke it down, I realized we were using the exact same thing. And so there's all these times when all of you are just looking at the same thing from a different perspective, and you're not, because you don't have their perspective, you're not able to even appreciate or understand how what they know fits into what you know.
Yeah, great point. And I think with medical research, it often, I see a trend now to include the patient perspective. And maybe not in some of the primary scientific papers, but let's say in like a webinar or something that presents findings, you have some affected person with that disease talking about their experience and maybe how this might fit in with what they know. So I think it's all good. And I don't know how to encourage that. Maybe, just through more dialogues like this and at conferences. But I think it does help to talk about how you communicate things, whether, it's that first piece of having the data and communicating it in a paper, or further along the process, communicating with wider and wider audiences.
Yeah. I think it's the classic example of group work in some sense, that you're working in a team or group setting, and like one person ends up doing all the work. And so I think coming back to like finding your niche and what type of projects you want to work with in the people, I do think it's important to figure out those things that like you can just do with little review of external groups, because as we're all aware, just the more people that it gets to be this like too many cooks thing, and it's like, I just want to say this, I just want to do this project, and it really gets halted. But have a good mix of doing things that you personally want to do, or you and your small team, versus like a larger group, so you're not bogged down too much by any one of those things.
Definitely. And that's where I think it helps to have sort of, as we were talking about before, sort of a brand or something you want to be known for and known for doing well. And maybe it's those things that you really push yourself to get other perspectives and, really be like, try to get to the bottom of this issue. And other things, maybe, you just want to do it quickly, get the paper out or whatever it is, and be done. So
no reviews on publishing this. It's what I want to say. I'm sure we've all had the experience where you're like, this looks good, and someone's like, did you read that? It's just missing so many holes. Okay, so all right, I want to round this out, and the title of this session is Young Researcher Session from Publication to Press and Social Media. Okay, if you could leave people listening in on this with, I don't know, a call to action. That sounds gross. What if they want to get more into communicating their science? What are some easy steps to get over initial barriers, or maybe what even are some of the first barriers to get over?
I think one of the barriers is, narrowing down what you want to do and get good at. And so maybe one of the first steps could be to find, maybe 5 examples of great science communication that you want to emulate. So look out in the world and just like on the topic you're interested in, just find those examples or a great scientific paper that was written that is easy to understand and uses not too much jargon but still conveys the science, or whatever it is, or a great podcast, and find those examples, and then you can work toward how can you be more, how can you produce those sorts of things for yourself. And also, just at a very basic level, this is what I wish for scientists too. Get to know the science communicators. I really do like it when scientists send me their papers, just ping me on Twitter, or, those are really helpful for me. And it's not, I think sometimes people think it's too much self-promotion. But I think it actually does, for someone like me, it helps me do my job better, to be aware of these papers and to have, even if there's no assignment I'm working on, to just have a quick dialogue on direct message or email dialogue or something, 5 minutes, to help me understand this paper, because maybe down the road it'll become relevant to me and that will stick in my mind. So so really kind of reaching out to science communicators. And again, I'm not promising everyone will respond, because, everyone's busy. And when you're on assignment, it's like, no, that's the only thing you're doing right now. But just in general, reaching out to the people around you who do science communication and finding those examples.
Yeah, that's a great point. And from experience, most people will respond. And another percentage will need 4 or 5 follow-ups, and they will still respond after that. And then the other percentage, who cares, right? Because if they haven't responded in that point, you probably don't need or want to talk to them anyways. But it's such an easy step, just, on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, just be like, hey, I like this post, or I did this thing. I wonder if it's interesting to you. And I think it's that easy. It's not quite as difficult.
Yeah. And one of the great ways that I've made connections with both scientists and science communicators is, when I find examples of things I love, I just tell them and send them a really quick email about why I liked it. And, because for all of us, we so seldom receive nice comments. It's usually, yeah. And for a science communicator and things like, when talking about breastfeeding, there's a lot of kind of trolling that goes on too. And so, having a nice comment is just really memorable. And so you might be apt to get into a dialogue with that person. So, just spreading the kindness.
What does that say? What does that say when we're just like, oh, it would be nice to have a good comment?
Yeah.
No, trolls abound. Absolutely. Well, this is really good. It's great to have you on here. And just a reminder for those listening in, this is a prelude to the FASF SRC conference, the origins and benefits of biologically active components in human milk. A scientist can't make short titles to save our lives. It'll be on June 22nd through 24th of 2021. It's a virtual conference. And click on the link to get to that. And this has been a glimpse of what Session 6 is going to be. Session 6 on the 24th, which is Young Researcher Sessions from Publication to Press and Social Media. So it's great to have you on, Kristina.
Thanks so much, Stephen. It's been fun.